And we welcome you all to episode 3 of the Steel Download podcast. Dan Ridenauer here with Gabe Koza. So here we get it rolling. Bit of a rough week for our Steelers last week, a 17-14 loss to the Bucks at Heinz Field. But here we are coming into week 3 tomorrow. Well, I guess 2 days when you listen to it from now when they play the Panthers. We'll see how that goes. Great to have you though here today, Gabe. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on. Another episode in the books. Hopefully, many more to come.
Hopefully many more indeed. And now, I mean, it wasn't quite the greatest run. I feel like, that preseason game, it's still the preseason, but there is so much to talk about. It might just be a trend, too, that I've kind of seen is that the Steelers don't have the greatest luck in the preseason when they're at home. Is that just me?
I can kind of reiterate that. Like for me, ever since that Kenny Pickett game, which is ironic because it was against the Buccaneers, and then the other game they had against the Falcons where he just lit it up. I was bought into Kenny Pickett. I was bought into that offense. Yes, I was bought into a Matt Canada offense. I thought things were going to change, and they weren't. And things kind of stayed on course with what they were the prior year. So for me, like, I think you could keep tabs on the preseason, but for me, I look at this team, I look at what the writers have said. There really wasn't much wiggle room in terms of guys that could make it on the 53. The roster was pretty set from the moment they traded for Jalen Ramsey and Jonnu Smith. They do seem to have some unlucky preseason luck, but for me, a lot of that, I mean, a lot of, Tampa played a lot of their starters towards the beginning of that game. Pittsburgh, obviously, their quarterback isn't playing. I don't believe DK played. I don't believe Jalen Ramsey played. I don't believe TJ Watt played. Obviously, there's a big situation with Cam Hayward, so maybe that could be part of it. I don't know. But yeah, definitely some weird home luck at Acrisure Stadium. I saw they sold like 65,000 tickets, so there's still a good crowd there for a preseason game. But I don't know. Hopefully, this trend doesn't continue on into the regular season.
Well, and yeah, and football's football. Either way, that's part of why, Pittsburgh's always been loyal to their fan base up there. So I feel like, and then kind of like you said too, like Cam, DK, they're kind of in their own thing. But why would you though want to play somebody, that's is going to be a starter, is established in the league, and then worry about him getting hurt? And I mean, that's really what the preseason is. Like when we were coming in, from last season, we never heard of Skylar Thompson. We never heard of, all these other guys. Like we've heard of Kyle Trask, and I've heard of Connor Bazelak. But beyond that, like it's that's really what the preseason boils down to is seeing guys kind of, that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah, the development factor is interesting, and it's pretty cool to see guys, like you said, that for the most part, a lot of these guys, gets to 90 some odd spots on the roster during the preseason. A lot of these guys are mainly going to be practice squad players for their career, which is nothing wrong with that. It's still impressive, but you're just not going to see them on CBS, Fox, or NBC or ESPN on Monday Night Football. So it's like it's a development, and as for the Steelers, it's something that with the 53 already being set, it's hard for me to kind of look at the preseason and find those gem guys. There have been a couple guys like Scotty Miller, shout out Bowling Green alum there, but he's had a fairly good camp and a fairly good preseason there as he's representing. And it looked like, from what I was reading from Steeler writer Mark Caboli, that at the start of camp, it looked like he probably wasn't going to make the chops on the roster, and it was sort of it's sort of a battle between him and Beanie Bishop for that roster spot. And over the last month, from what he's saying, Scotty Miller sounds like he is close to securing that job, while as Beanie Bishop, he might be on the chopping block for being cut. So it's interesting to see those little battles play out, but I mean, we know who's going to start, and even backups for most positions, we know who those players are going to be. But still cool to watch for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. Scotty didn't do too bad. 38 yards, was third on the team for yesterday's game. Like they didn't have, and that's too, like you think 38 yards, well, that's nothing. The Steelers didn't really have the greatest game overall, receiving wise. And then when rushing, they had Caleb Johnson, go out for 50 on 11. So you had that, but I'd say the Bowling Green alum that really reigned supreme on for this game was Connor Bazelak, 106 yards. Was only four that he didn't complete on, 14 for 18. Like he had a pretty good game too, and I was surprised to see him play like that.
Yeah, I mean, he looked like a starter out there. I mean, we tout Baker Mayfield for his ability to show off his gunslinging arm in this offense, but Bazelak, I mean, he looked great, and shout out to him making the most of his opportunities. But back to the whole starter thing, I mean, I thought it was interesting. Fox aired a game a couple days ago between Cincinnati and Washington, and Cincinnati played Joe Burrow for, I think, two or three offensive drives. And man, even as a rival fan, like I'm like, dude, I could just put myself in the place of Bengals fans just sitting there like, please take Joe Burrow out of the game because their offensive line struggled during that preseason game, and there were a couple times Burrow was evading pressure and running backwards. And it's like, please go down. And then on the other side, Jaden Daniels played one offensive drive and they ran the ball a couple times. The Bengals defense did not look good. So if you're a Steeler fan, like there's one thing you could take from this preseason is that when the Bengals were playing majority of their starters in that game against a Washington team that was playing a lot of their starters like Debo and like JD, they looked terrible. I mean, they were giving up loads of rushing yards. And it got to a point where I believe Washington was near the red zone. And Jaden, I don't know if it was a designed run or a pass. I don't know if I can recall it. But nonetheless, he scrambles out and he's able to score, but he didn't go untouched. There were like three or four defenders that made contact with him, and you could just see the Washington sideline like get down, get down, get down. So like there is that marginal benefit. I feel like that guys can kind of get their feet wet and really get some experience because it's a long off season and it's been a while since some of these guys have played, especially if you're a team that like the Steelers that either were an early playoff exit or didn't make the playoffs at all, which is majority of teams. I mean, you were done with the season in January, December. I mean, and flash forward now, it's August. So it's been a while. Obviously, they have training camp and OTAs, but those are a little different than actual games with fans against opposing teams on a field, the pressure. So there's that marginal benefit, but to me, the con of getting your players injured is just too great. Definitely like special teams guys. Like if you have a rookie, inexperienced kicker, definitely want to get him out there. Like the Ravens have been trying to get Tyler Loop out there to get him up to speed. But yeah, it's to me not worth it at all.
And that's part of it, is who you're going to play, who you're not, who needs those reps, who doesn't. But the AFC North is just kind of fallen off in some ways crazily. Like it's just the amount of things that we've seen, from Cleveland and then Baltimore and Cincinnati, the way they're playing, and like Cincinnati, I'd say Joe Burrow's a top four, top five quarterback in the AFC. And still, they haven't had much success since what, 2022, 2021, when they made their Super Bowl run.
Yeah.
So around those 2 years, like it's kind of been an uphill battle for them. And then Baltimore as well, just trying to get things figured out with, getting weapons almost, and trying to develop weapons like Isaiah Likely. And, they've had issues and they've had guys go and all that. But what I'm really interested to see is the way Cincinnati's kind of changing on the offense side, like the way they're working with the offensive line, because I don't know if they're kind of beating a dead horse like they always have been, or if they're actually trying to get those guys in place.
Well, Cincinnati's interesting because they've been a team that's been kind of cursed by slow starts. Like some of these last few years, if they would have even just been 500 going into weeks 4 or 5, things would have looked a lot different. And given the top tier talent on their team, the high end talent, shout out Urinating Tree. I mean, they would have, I think, easily been a contender for AFC Championship or title if things went right. The Steelers a little bit different than that. I feel like the middle of the season is where they're kind of on their hot streak, and then it's towards the end of the season, the last 3, 4, 5 games, where things sometimes start to fall apart. Now, granted, last season was a bit of an exception, but if you look back at like 2018 or 2020, where you had some really good teams going into like weeks 10 or 11, and then that back half stretch was just not great. I mean, you had a majority losses in the losing column there. So I think that's definitely the rationale as to why they're doing this. But in terms of their offensive line, I mean, we saw them spend big on Orlando Brown and players like that, and La'el Collins, who that did not go over right. They ended up cutting him. I think it's a mixture of kind of both, of drafting guys like Ravarius Mims, but also signing veterans like Brown and trying to mix those guys together with also some guys that were veterans who you could potentially snag them on cheaper deals. It's going to be an interesting year for Cincinnati. I mean, they finally were able to retain Higgins and Chase and Burrow simultaneously. I'm not sure how they did it, but they did. I'm sure Bengals fans would love them to keep Trey Hendrickson, but that just sort of seems too far considering the owner Brown's money and his net worth is mostly tied to the team, and he just doesn't have that much money to wheel and deal with players. So it's interesting. The AFC North, the Browns are clearly probably in rebuild mode. The Bengals are, to me, that it's all about the start of their season. If they can go 4-2 to start off their season or whatever mixture you want to think of it, if they can at least be 500 by week 4 or 5, then I think they could be a scary team. And then Baltimore is a really interesting team. They've kind of been stubborn against taking receivers or drafting receivers, and it's just been weird. Like it's kind of like the Packers, but the Packers finally drafted a receiver in the first round in Matthew Golden. They kind of are very sort of Steeler-like, where they want to run the ball, they want to throw the ball to their tight ends, but we'll see what ends up happening. Zay Flowers going into big year. We'll see what ends up happening. I don't know. I still think the Ravens are probably going to hold the top of the division, but as for the Bengals, I'm a bit skeptical on them winning more than 10 or 11 games this year. I think the Steelers slot in at the 2 spot, and I think the Bengals are at 3, and then I think the Browns at 4 is pretty clear.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And even though Detroit's still struggling, like they haven't had the greatest performance this preseason, but that there's some growing pains too with any good team. But you start off on the road, you play Cleveland, then you go to then you have Jacksonville, then you got to go to Minnesota. JJ McCarthy, he's kind of coming back, making a bit of his return after that tragic injury last season. Denver, you got to go to Mile High, but then you come back and you get Detroit at home. I mean, Dan Campbell's really been shaking some things up, but looking at this Bengals schedule, there's a lot of road games to start out. And, that's difficult not for just like the Bengals, but for any team overall, is playing so many road games. And that's one thing, too, I've noticed with the AFC North overall is the amount of road games. Because even Pittsburgh, they play their second game at Heinz Field October 12th, and that's almost never heard of. Because, yes, they do technically have a home game, like a second home game before that, but it's marked in Dublin, which is more of a neutral site, if you ask me.
No, for sure it is. And we talked about it a little bit on the last podcast episodes, but those international games, I think apart from Jacksonville, every team hates playing in those games because you lose a home game and it's such a big disadvantage for your team when you look at, especially when you're looking at the playoff, getting into a playoff run and you're crunching the numbers and you're like, dang man, like this game right here got away from us. And then imagine if we had another home game, we could have had a win there, we'd be in. So those international games are always tough, and it's tough for travel as well. Even if they have some extra time off, just I feel like guys, it's sort of such a different atmosphere from what they're used to, and I think it can maybe throw some guys off in terms of their routines and then just kind of what they're used to because you're in a different country, and there's a lot more press and media going on. There's a lot more special events going on, and obviously the time change is the biggest thing. Uh, that's 6 hours, I believe, from Pittsburgh. I'm not 100% sure though, but it's a struggle, man. I will say it's a better schedule than what they had last year. Last year's schedule was quite possibly the worst scheduling you could have ever sort of made for a team. I mean, they played what, Kansas City and Philadelphia back-to-back weeks or somewhere around there, and then you throw in Baltimore in there. I mean, it was absurd. So it's nice to see the Steelers team with not as hard of a schedule, but it's definitely not going to be easy pickings this year.
Well, I mean, speaking of that, I mean, that's the guy we got rid of. Pickens, he's gone. He's off to Dallas on, Najee Harris could be playing Pittsburgh baseball with the way he's been acting. So, I mean, either way, all right. So,
Yeah, Najee Harris. I will say, like Caleb Johnson, I, I'm really looking forward to him, and he should be a pretty I will say Najee was one of the most reliable running backs I've ever seen. I mean, the guy barely missed games. He was just a carry merchant, really. I mean, he was just a definition of a workhorse. Maybe analytically wise, in terms of efficiency and yards per carry, he probably wasn't there. But I think Caleb Johnson should be able to fill that role, and the Steelers should be have what they've had for the last couple of years, where they sort of have Warren on those third downs, where he's using one of the best run blocking running backs or pass blocking running backs in the entire NFL, and you can sort of sparse him in on earlier downs as well. But having Caleb Johnson run on that first down, trying to gain 5 or 6 yards, and then that way that shortens the line to gain for a first down, and it really just opens up to what you can do because defenses just have so much more challenges as the yardage shrinks. And if they blitz, then you can throw a short pass. If they stay in pass pro, you can still run it. So there's just a lot of things. So I mean, it's the Steelers' philosophy, and it's a big year for a lot of stuff needs to happen this year, and that's one of the things that does. And I think in order for that to happen, it's a two-pronged sort of initiative, and the first thing is offensive line. We talked about this in length. Yeah, that's definitely a part that they're going to have to step up, and luckily Broderick Jones has looked good. We'll see if that carries over into the regular season, but I like the interior guys. I like McCormick. I like Zach Frazier. I like Sam Walu. Like, I think those guys can be pretty good for the run game. So I think you should be able to get consistent play there. Now it's all going to be about consistency, staying healthy. Obviously, Warren struggled with that hamstring injury last season, and hamstring injuries are a killer. They're a silent killer in sports. Like, people think hamstring injury, oh, you're out for a couple weeks. It's whatever. Not only do you miss those couple weeks, but you're also going to be slightly slower coming back from that injury. It takes time to acclimate yourself back to what you were at full strength. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out for the Steelers this year.
Well, and that's one thing too, is they need to learn how to share the workload, if that makes sense. They need to learn how they can't be a one-man show or a two-man show, like they have been in years past. They need to go back and revert to when the guys, you'd have Willie Parker, Jerome Bettis. Now you have Caleb Johnson, Jalen Warren. So you kind of are able to share the workload in that aspect. What quarterback looks like is a toss-up. Skylar Thompson's been looking really promising. I'm trying to ride the Mason Rudolph train for as long as I can, but eventually that's going to subside. And then offensively, I mean, Troy Fontanu was a great pickup. Derek Harmon didn't go for the more, I guess, attractive option, Shador, and now you got him instead. And I was a huge fan of that. No matter what they're saying about Shador now, I don't regret that at all. And then defensive wise too, you got Jalen's coming in. Cam Hayward's kind of TBD at this point, but TJ Watt's doing just fine. And too, with the Cam situation, I wonder if we'll have almost like a Le'Veon Bell, if you remember that from like
Could
I
be,
believe the
yeah.
2019 season,
Yeah,
where he was
I
just
don't
busy in
know.
Miami the whole time.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll get to that extreme where he's in Miami and then, Bud Dupree's cleaning out his locker, going through his shoes, and it's being videotaped. Like, I don't know if it's going to go to that extreme, but I
Hmm.
think, it's going to get pretty bad here. I think there's a good chance that he might miss a game. I hope it doesn't happen. But the reality is that Cam's team, his agents, they just don't have much leverage here, given Cam's age. And even if the season he came off was that impressive, his asking price is just not that high because statistically speaking, I mean, guys that age at that position, or really any position of football, like you're taking such a gamble that next year is not going to be a step off from the previous year. So we'll see what ends up happening. Cam's team really messed up by signing that contract next year and having the Steelers basically be able to pay out a substantial amount of money in bonuses back in March. And I'm kind of curious why they didn't decide to do this holdout earlier. But nonetheless, I mean, he is probably underpaid for his production. But I mean, this is a business, and it's cutthroat sometimes, and it sucks. Cam is one of the last guys that I view as really the definition of the Steeler way, just a tough player, defensive line player. There's been a lineage of great Steelers players on the defensive line. He's been through the Killer Bees. He was through the sort of end of the Ben era. He was through the Kenny Pickett era. He's one of the longest tenured Steelers on the team, but it could get ugly here. I think he ends up staying on the team, but I wouldn't doubt him sitting out a few games. And I would also say that he's taking a gamble here because there's a chance that Benton and Harmon end up playing fairly good to start off the season, and the Steelers, not that they wouldn't need Cam Hayward, but would say, we don't need you as much anymore, and he will continue to lose leverage. So now, of course, they could, start off bad. Maybe there's an injury, but there's a lot of risk in this, and we'll see where it goes.
I mean, that's really a toss up right now with Cam. I mean, he's definitely a leader. He's definitely has some credentials like NFL Man of the Year, defensively he's been lights out. I mean, but that's just father time catches up to you, and that's part of the game that we don't like to talk about, but it gets there, and the leverage he has is still there at this point, mainly because of his name, I'd say. But also, too, he still has some of those numbers. Like, he's not completely washed either. So, Hayward's going to have to do the best he can. I don't see him sitting out like 6, 7 games, maybe like only one or two. But from beyond that standpoint, I mean, we're going to have to really see what happens against the Jets because the way I see it as the way that we play against the Jets at MetLife is really going to be the deciding factor on how we go to Seattle, how we play Minnesota, how we play Cleveland. And I mean, Cleveland too, right now, they're dealing with some rebuilds and they're kind of trying to get some new guys like Shador Sanders, Isaiah Bond, they're trying to get. And I mean, they're kind of on the tail end of their quarterback deal, but I mean, offensive wise, they got Njoku, they have Fannin, they have, receivers as well. So Cleveland too could try to jump up and have a year for themselves.
They could. I mean, they could be a sleeper team, but in general, I just think there's a lot of assumptions, particularly on the offensive side of the ball for them, that you would have to make in order for them to be above 500 team. You're banking on, even Joe Flacco, I think is slightly overrated. Like, that Texans playoff game a couple of years was brutal. He couldn't stop turning the ball over, and even during that run they had a couple years ago where they sort of came out of nowhere and sort of came out from the water of the injuries they had. And even during that stretch where they were winning games, A, they really weren't playing that good of competition, and B, Joe Flacco was still turning the ball over a lot. So I think that benefits the Steelers, greatly. If the Steelers defense can
Mm-hmm.
create turnovers, that's part of the winning formula is create turnovers defensively through sacks and then interceptions and then, you know, burn out the other team's defense by running the ball and sort of play the time game on them. But there's a lot you have to make. They have an aging offensive line. A lot of their players are aging. A lot of them have injury concerns. A lot of them are young. Jerry Judy's great. Other than that, I know they brought in Bond, but yeah, it's another complicated situation there. I don't really know what's there for them. Fannins looks good, and Njoku looks good. Their tight end should be a good duo for this season. And then quarterback wise, if you're assuming Flacco doesn't start, you're banking on two quarterbacks that were drafted after the second round to be good, and it just does not happen very often. So I just think you're banking on a lot of stuff happening. And defensively, they have a lot of stars at the top, but there are some holes. Martin Emerson went down with an injury. We'll see what Greg Newsome looks like as sort of the starting boundary corner opposite to Denzel Ward. We'll see what it looks like. I mean, Myles Garrett's great, but other than that, there's still a couple of missing pieces there. But who knows? Maybe Cleveland surprises everyone again.
Well, and is it just me, or is the whole way the Miles Garrett situation kind of unraveled? It always seemed kind of strange to me, I guess. The way that he was all kind of upset at Cleveland, and I don't blame him at all. Like, for a man for his caliber, needs to get what he deserves. He's like, screw you guys. I want to win a ring. I'm not taking this. I'm not taking that. And it's like, wait, oh, 40 million? I love Cleveland. And it's just like, it was so like odd, I guess, to me. And now we're seeing that with Micah Parsons too, where, Jerry ended up paying more than he originally planned to, and but that's like kind of reverting back to your point. It's a business, you got to treat them like employees at some point, even though they are people. They're going out there, and I mean, their job isn't the worst in the world. I'd say you got to play football for a living. That I mean, that's really awesome, but The fact is, Cleveland's, their quarterback room is still the same. Flacco, Gabriel, Shador, Kenny. I mean, those are even questionable. But looking at the defense too, I mean, Devin Bush is going to come out. Denzel Ward, we don't know at this point. And I mean, but Miles Garrett still, I feel like, is going to be their bread and butter. But also, one thing too that's kind of similar with Pittsburgh and Cleveland is if you look at the kickers, I mean, Dustin Hopkins and Chris Boswell are nowhere near the level of, Young anymore.
Yeah, they're definitely not. And it is interesting too, you bring up Boswell. He also is looking for a new contract. It's not being talked about enough. I don't think he holds out for it. But the Steelers need to pay Chris Boswell. I mean, to me, has been like now with the whole Tucker situation and him being out of the league, I think he's the best kicker in the league. I mean, that Atlanta game was unbelievable. I'm pretty sure he scored all of our points in that game. And the last playoff win that the Steelers had against the Kansas City Chiefs, they won that game by only kicking field goals. They did not score a touchdown in that game. So the Steelers need to play their kick. They need to pay Boswell. He's the best of the business. But I think you mentioned earlier one of the sad truths kind of in sports is the idea of age and how all players are eventually going to hit their prime and fall down. I think the second one is that money is king. And it's sort of, we can get into a longer debate on how it's kind of, some sports it's kind of ruined the idea of actually loving the sport and how like the idea of playing the sport for money is sort of taken over and the negatives that that's resulted in. But yeah, I mean, money, there's a few guys that are exceptions to this, like Jose Ramirez in Cleveland took a massive pay cut. But just don't expect most players to do that. And I'm not knocking them for it. It's a free market. If you want to get your money, that's fine. But, the reality is that Cam Hayward, if you came up to him tomorrow and you had a lot of salary cap, a lot of money, and you gave him a bunch of money, he would take the offer. And that's just the reality we live in sports. Guys can say they hate this team, they hate this, they hate the owner, they hate the city, they hate all of this. But you give them a blank check, they'll gladly stay on that team and talk about how good one of their favorite restaurants is in Cleveland. So that's the reality of sports.
Well, and the thing is too, Cleveland doesn't have the same glamour, as some other NFL teams. And I mean, they've always kind of been, the butt end of a joke. So maybe that's part of it. But I mean, Cleveland has definitely, I'd say, improved. Like they're kind of more growing sideways now. They're not the same 0-16 Johnny Manziel Browns, but they're not like at the potential where they could be. And I don't see them. I don't see them getting third, second, first. They're going to be. I see them being fourth in the North this year. I think the Steelers now we finally have the best kicker in the North now that Tucker's gone, and I mean Boswell just unbelievable. He's definitely got us out of some pinches here and there. But I mean, really too. I mean, the Steelers just if they can get it down on special teams, that's going to be that hidden X factor. That not a lot of people are looking at is if you're able to get it on that level.
Yeah, I mean Miles Kilbur is still here, who's, famous for his punt blocks that he gets maybe once or twice a year, but when he gets them, I mean they radically change the course of a game. Danny Smith is still the special teams coordinator for this team. He's been the special teams coordinator for ages. They've had some interesting moments. Like last season, they brought in Cordell Patterson and they wanted to try and stay ahead of the curve on the rule changes related to the kickoffs. And a lot of Steeler fans, including myself, were rather optimistic about this, and we're like, hey, there's a chance the Steelers could return some kicks this year, maybe one or two, but that could radically change the season because if you look at the way our offense is, probably not going to score that many points. We're going to be limited in our ceiling. If you can add an extra 6 or 7 points on the board for 1 to 2 games during a season, I mean, that could change everything. That could be the difference between you playing a road playoff game as a 7th seed or playing a home game as a 4th seed. So it's interesting. We'll see what ends up happening. I would assume Cam Johnson is the punter. I don't know what that's looking like, but I would assume he's the punter. Waitman had his fair shares of ups and downs throughout the season, but he was relatively okay. But Johnson, they brought him in last season. He blows out his ACL, I believe, against the Falcons, misses the entire year. Had been a reliable punter for the Texans, I believe, and he should be the punter this year, and the Steelers should have a decent punt team. Kickoff, I don't think the Steelers are really going to invest as much into it. Obviously, Cordell Patterson getting cut a couple of weeks ago. So we'll see what ends up happening. I'm just hoping for some blocked Miles Kilber punts and hopefully no muffed punts. The Steelers had some issues with that in the prior seasons, but luckily
Mhm.
Calvin Austin has actually done a pretty good job as a punt returner. For me, honestly, like I'm very conservative when it comes to that. I it's gonna be cool to get those big punt returns in terms of yardage or maybe even scoring, but I just want them to catch the ball because we saw Gunnar Olszewski a couple
Mhm.
years ago. I mean, just one of the worst special team players I've ever seen. And considering he was brought in from New England for that specific reason to be that bad was just horrible for me. And some of those muff punts, those happen in your own territory, deep in your own territory. It could definitely change the course of the entire game.
Yeah, and you never know where those things go. And yeah, I'm sure you probably remember it too. I can't remember the guy's name for some reason, but that punt return against Cleveland a couple years ago, where he kept it from going out of bounds at like the 10-yard line on that kick, that always just stuck in my head and was crazy to think about. But they're gonna have to kind of buckle up this year, and I feel like if you don't expect the big play, you just let it happen naturally, it'll come to you. And I feel like too, if you do the little things right, day in and day out, that's where you're going to get success. You're not going to get success from, taking a flash for Instagram, taking a flash for this or that. It's really going to have to go down to where you're able to go at the end of the season, like where you want to go, and just writing that down on paper and being like, okay, if I want to get here, this is the work that I need to do.
Yeah, and I believe it was Gunnar Olszewski that did that. I'm not 100% sure, but he did a lot of brutal moves. But yeah, those little things matter a lot. And, we'll see. I think the biggest thing is the offense for this team. The defensively, they should be a top three unit in the league. They just should be with the amount of money and resources that have been allocated to that side of the ball. There's no reason they shouldn't be a top performing defense in the league. But offensively, it's they're gonna have to be better than they were the last couple seasons, which easier said than done. Second year for Arthur Smith, like the Arthur Smith hire because for me it was not working. These internal hires clearly they just weren't, especially on the offensive side of the ball. We had a string of bad coordinators from Haley to Fiechner, and then obviously to Matt Canada. So they go out, get an external guy, get a guy like Arthur Smith who had a lot of success with the Titans, coached in North Carolina in college, I believe and then he goes out, coaches Atlanta, doesn't do that great as a head coach, but there's tons of stories of great coordinators that don't do great as a head coach. So I thought that was great to have him specifically because if Arthur Smith were to design a great offense for the Steelers, there's a less likely chance that he gets poached by another team, given the fact that he already was a head coach and there really wasn't that much to be excited about. The Falcons were kind of a mediocre team. A lot of people criticized him, particularly his usage of Kyle Pitts. But with Pittsburgh, he has his guys in place. He has Jonnu Smith. He has a veteran quarterback that should follow with the way things are schematically designed to be and that outside zone running. He has a couple, in my opinion, Jalen Warren, a veteran running back, proven. I think Caleb Johnson is going to be a good running back in this league. He has DK Metcalf, kind of that guy that if defenses do go one high up top, you can just throw him the ball and sort of have that threat to make sure the defenses stay in two shell and therefore opening up the running game. So we'll see what ends up happening, but offensively, they need to make a step, man. Because for me, the last 3 years they've been an average. If I were to average it out, I'd say like 25th or 26th best offense in the league. They probably need to step up to 17 or 16. And I think if you can get a middle of the pack offense with a top three defense, I think things can go well, and dare I say they can maybe win a playoff game.
Yeah, that's at the forefront of everybody's minds, is winning a playoff game. And that's what they're going to be working towards, but it's got to have to be earned. Nothing's going to be handed to you. What I like too with Smith, I will say I was more skeptical of him at first, but now that he's gotten some time to get his feet wet, understand the offense a little more, I think he's going to do a good job this season. He's going to have to be a leader. I mean, but he's not going to have to be the level of leader, as like Tomlin, who's running the whole ship, which I feel like that kind of gives him leverage, because I feel like part of the reason why Atlanta didn't work out for him was because he was so overwhelmed, and he didn't know exactly how to handle it in some aspects. But now I feel like, he's got his ground in Pittsburgh. He's got his offense rolling, and he's got some good pieces that even if this year doesn't work out for him, if we see Fontanu and Harmon work out the way we want them to, I mean, it could be a scary Pittsburgh team going into the mid to late 2020s.
Yeah, it could. And like one of the things that I was furious about, like I was furious about a lot of things that Kevin Colbert did towards the end of his tenure, but the lack of investment into the offensive line was pretty, disheartening and scary for me. And we've
Mhm.
seen it. Like the offensive line has suffered because they just have A, not been willing to spend big in free agency, or B, not being able to, not willing to invest high draft capital in offensive linemen. But they finally started to change under Omar Khan with Fontanu and obviously with Broderick Jones. But we'll end up seeing what happens with this sort of young offensive line. Sumualo, and then of course Zach Frazier have been good. I think that those guys are pretty proven. I think McCormick as well should be pretty good for the Steelers this year. So inside, I like what they have at the guards and center. But tackles is going to be a big thing, like you said. It's sort of a little bit risky, but man, the rewards are just so big. If those guys can pay off, then you got two guys at the tackle position that can hold down the fort when you're trying to pass the ball and you need 2 or 3 seconds. And it could really develop a crazy offense. And, you get a couple receivers in there, you get a young quarterback in there, you could be looking at the Killer Bees revamped with that protection at the tackle position. So, there's a lot of things. Like football is one of the greatest team sports in the world. So it's not just one person that has to do their job. Everybody does. All the starters, including the second guys, because injuries are going to happen, and the coaching staff has to do their job as well. But I weirdly kind of feel optimistic because there's a lot of pressure on these guys. Mike Tomlin has called, people have called for his job, and in general, people have been questioning the Steeler way, which has led to 6 world championships, tons of playoff appearances. Has developed one of the most loyal fan bases in the league, and to have all that being questioned, the standard is the standard, this sort of run first, defense first philosophy, it's definitely interesting. And this feels like a do or die season where if things don't go well, I would not be surprised if you see the Steelers try their hardest to trade up in the draft for a quarterback or totally punt next season and tank for a high draft pick in the following season.
They could. I mean, I don't see it. I feel like they're going to stick with the head coach. I feel like Tomlin wants his winning record. We're going to have to still see that for, like, unless he doesn't get it this season, I mean, then maybe the gates open. But the way things are rolling now, he's going to be pretty dead set on that. That's kind of his standard, which, I mean, just getting by is not a good standard to have. We need to get back to that, that Cowher later in his tenure, get back to what Noel started originally of our standard and what we need. And Tomlin, he had that standard, but part of why he had such a successful beginning is that the groundwork was already built. Even though if Bettis retired, you still had pieces, like Troy, you had Ben, you had James Harrison, you had this guy and that guy, and we could go on and on. But overall, just, I mean, they could, though, in theory, just depending on who comes up. Like, I don't see them going for Arch Manning, but Jeremiah Smith, I mean, if they want to tank for him in 2027, I mean, that's a possibility as well. But I mean, it would be kind of crazy too if they do try to tank this season, which I doubt. I mean, if it doesn't go their way, they might just say, forget about it. We may as well and try to go for like that big name guy when they host the draft, which I mean, that would be pretty cool to see. I think it's a more far-fetched, crazy idea of mine, but and you never know. And it'll be cool though to see the draft come back to Pittsburgh.
That's for sure. I think in Pittsburgh in general, like just in terms of sporting events, it's kind of weird that they haven't had more. Like you think about it, they have one of the best ballparks in the MLB, but they haven't held an All-Star game, I think, in over 20 years or something like that. And in NHL
Hmm.
wise, they haven't held an NHL All-Star game for a while. They held the draft in, I believe, 2000, and I don't remember what year it was, but somewhere in the mid 2010s. But it's still been a while for NHL events. So just in general, the city of Pittsburgh has been lacking sports events in terms of big venues like All-Star games or stuff of that nature. So it's nice to see them get the draft hopefully I can make my way up there. I don't know if you'll be able to make your way up there, Dan, but one thing is for sure, when the Browns are picking, when the Ravens are picking, when the Bengals are picking, probably when the Cowboys are
Oh,
picking as well, there will be a chorus of boos, and everyone will be reminded just how faithful these Steeler fans are to not only their team, but those established rivalries.
it it's gonna be scary to walk in there. Dallas, I feel like kind of is one of those everybody hates Dallas. I would
True.
love to
Yeah.
see, when I'd rather see when Oakland's picking, like everybody
Mm,
makes a Franco Harris joke. I would love to see that, but that I feel like that'll be more your diehard old timer
old
Steelers
heads.
fans,
Yeah.
like the guys with the Steelers jersey of like like the Neil O'Donnell jerseys, the possible Big Ben jerseys, the more of like the Troy, the James, the Bettis, the Willie Parkers, the even if you want to take it back, like the Rocky Blyer jerseys. But
Hmm.
if the Steelers fans pull up in like I don't know, like a Juju jersey or a George Pickens jersey, they're not going to really get it, and that's just
Yeah.
okay with the way the culture. But yeah, it'll be ruthless to see, and I know I'm thinking about going. I'd love to go. I mean, I feel like that's pretty much anybody's bucket list. I know it's going to cost a pretty penny, but I mean, you never know, and just the way it could work out. And I think Pittsburgh's a diehard town that deserves its flowers. I mean, I like the Pirates. I can't stand the Penguins just because I'm a Blue Jackets fan, but
Mm.
you know, I think it's interesting too, just the way we'll see things roll. And I mean, and maybe too, with the way the NL Central is going right now, the Cubs are hosting, and I want to say it's 2027. Maybe we see PNC have one after that, and I'd say it's the best. The Pirates have the best ballpark and the worst owner in the MLB.
Yeah, I have no question about that. I won't rebuke any of that. And it's a shame because to play in that beautiful of a stadium, but to have that bad of front office and management is just it's just a disgrace. You're playing in one of the most beautiful ballparks in baseball, in my opinion, the most beautiful ballpark in baseball. Especially if you take out like the sort of older stadium built bias where like if the stadium was built before the 1940s are automatically considered top five. Like if you're just looking at ones that were built in the last 30 to
Mhm.
40 years, it's the best. Like I know people like
Mhm.
Petco, people like I know it was called AT&T and out in San Francisco or Oracle Park, I think it's called now. They have that one
Mhm.
ranked up high as well. But to me, PNC stands alone with the skyline. And I would just say that I'm grateful that the Steelers are run by, I've had question marks around some of their management and some of the way, some of the things they've done over the last couple of years. But I think in general, Omar Khan and Andy Weil have done a good job of drafting players. They've done a good job at finding gems and finding talent, but also I think doing trades as well. I mean, that Chase Claypool trade was one of the greatest trades I've ever seen. And at first I was like, but it became very clear, even like, it was one of the few trades where I think a week after the trade happened, you kind of knew that the Steelers won that trade by a mile, and they ended up getting Joey Porter Jr., who's one of my favorite players in the Steelers. So I'm very grateful for Steelers management, and I'm not too big of a baseball fan, but my prayers go out to all Pirates fans. I don't think things get better until Nutting sells the team.
Yeah, and the Pirates, they got their own little thing going, and that's unfortunate for the Panthers, for college football, for the Pirates and baseball, Penguins and hockey. Is the Steelers are going to reign supreme above them all. That's just the market that the NFL's kind of built and Pittsburgh's had for the longest time. But really, too, the Claypool trade was really interesting. I mean, looking back, it was one of the greatest things we've done in recent history. But I will say, when it first started, I wasn't too thrilled about it. But I think I was looking more on the brand name than what was actually going to happen because of it. And we kind of had to let Claypool go. But yeah, like you said, we get JPJ in return, and now he's seen some positive growth, I'd say, from the later years. And I mean, he's got some of that more modern, elusiveness and that modern finesse, with speed, but he also has some of his dad's toughness. And I think that's really cool to see on a Steelers defense. All right, we're back for part two, I guess you could say, of episode three of the Steel Download podcast. Just some technical difficulties we got behind the scenes, still with Gabe, but yeah, we got Joey Porter with the way that kind of worked out. I really like seeing him too, as I was saying before we got, kind of kicked off of this was I really like how he has that modern sense of an NFL player, He plays with that elusiveness, that speed that the NFL's calling for now. Right. He still shows moments where he's like related to the original Joey Porter and how he has those moments where he can just get down and dirty and tough. And I really like to see that in the Steelers.
Yeah, I think he made a play against the Ravens. He had a really clutch tackle against them last season. I'm not sure if it was the Ravens, but sometime during last season, a really clutch tackle on a short pass. And I thought that was cool because one of the things coming out of the draft that people kind of knocked him for was his tackling. So to see his progression through his years in the NFL has been really cool. Obviously, the penalty issue is something he's going to have to get fixed, but I trust in him. I trust that he's the right people in his corner for sure, with his dad there giving him the right pointers and tips and wisdom to take that on the field and to get better. One thing I thought would be cool to talk about is, like, let's say you had a free schedule, money wasn't an issue. You could go to, excluding international games, you could travel to one Steeler
Mm.
road game. Which game would you go to?
Ooh,
Excluding postseason too, just regular season.
that's an awesome question. I actually like that more. I think we do like a question of the week instead of the blind
Yeah,
rank, and from moving forward, that was so. We'll do that for
it's
this week.
it's interesting because you can go the new stadium route, like you could do Allegiant, you could do SoFi, but you could also be like, yeah, Lambeau Field. I think I would lean towards Lambeau Field, honestly.
Mhm.
Like two of the most storied franchises in the NFL. Also, the Steelers and the Packers in different conferences, they're not going to play each other very often. So I think that's a
Mhm.
cool aspect there. So I would go Lambeau, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
Um, I mean, I want to say Lambo, but I also don't want to just copy you. Um, I could go with NFC North counter, like I could go with the Lions, like
Yeah,
around Christmas break. That would be really cool. But that's also like kind of just a cop out answer. Like I've been to Ford Field. I live an hour and 10 hour whatever from Detroit. Like you're not really getting that travel aspect. So I mean, obviously Dublin would be cool. I've never left the United States, but if we're keeping it
yeah,
here, LA would be fun because I feel like you could count
yeah,
that as an automatic win. You could go to see the sunny of California, but I'd have
yeah.
to say with the NFC North this year, I'm going to have to go with either the Bears, Packers, or Lions
Mm,
because I've been to Chicago twice. Shout out the city. I love Chicago. Um, Lambo's just needs no introduction, needs no
yeah.
explanation. It's just Lambo. And but also too, I feel like Ford Field would be a really cool one. My favorite Super Bowl was played there. Joey Porter won a ring there when now his son,
Mm-hmm.
who's on the team, was like
Mm-hmm.
probably what, 3, 4 years old. So I guess any NFC North team I would be okay with.
I think another cool one. I don't know if the stadium's like what it used to be because last year the Bills kind of took it over supposedly, but I still think Seattle would be awesome at Lumen
Mm-hmm.
Field with their fans and the way the stadium's kind of constructed to kind of take noise and make it even louder. Like the new stadiums, I didn't really want to go that route because you could kind of couple them all together. Like you want to go to US Bank, you want to go to SoFi, you want to go to Glendale. I also think Denver too would be a cool one. In
Cool.
Power
That would
Field,
be.
that would be a really cool one. The Steelers have had a lot of close battles with them, whether it be the Tim Tebow playoff game, whether it be the playoff game, I believe it was 2015 with the Fitzgerald Toussaint fumble, the game they played without Antonio Brown, without Le'Veon Bell, and they still made it a game, and they still almost went to the AFC Championship, but the fumble caused some issues there. Then they had the game in 2018 where they had the fake kick, they scored a touchdown off that. They had the long touchdown to, I believe, Juju. I'm not 100% sure. But they ended up losing that game, and that was a game that was sort of led to the spiral of that season. But I think in Power Field would be kind of cool. I kind of almost want to go that as my pick. The Steelers just always have good games there and impactful games there.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at it too, I feel like another one that I feel like would be cool is kind of the revenge tour that Minka's having, just, channel
Mm.
your inner Le'Veon Bell, go down to Miami. But I feel like seeing Minka, I mean, like that's where he started. I get it. That's the team that drafted him. So see him go back there is still kind of cool. I like the guy. So still shocking, but that is what it is. He's the second. I say he's the second guy Miami stolen from us in our franchise. But when you look back at it, Marino doesn't have a ring, so why does it matter? But
Yeah.
that would be cool though to like just go to any stadium and just travel. Like I wonder if traveling in the NFL, whether it's media, whether it's as a player, you know, marketing or like doctors, team trainers, personnel, like being able to travel to all those stadiums with these like big name people's got to be one of the coolest jobs ever.
Yeah, it's a little different from the NFL from other leagues. Like MLB, there's a lot of people that do that, the stadium tours. A little different because they have multiple games there and the teams stay at those cities for multiple nights. NFL is
Hmm.
very different where you're just kind of flying in, the night before you play the game and then you fly out. But still, I mean, it would be really awesome to go anywhere. I don't know about Miami because they have that thing where the stadium's constructed that the opposing team's sideline and stands is covered in the sun. And if you're
Oh
in
yeah.
there for a game in September or really even October, you're going to be sweating. Maybe not so bad in November, December. Obviously, me and you, Dan, we live up in the Midwest. It gets quite cold during November and December, so being in that Florida heat would be refreshing. But yeah, I think Mika, it was just such an interesting move because if you look at the Dolphins front office, Chris Greer is still the GM of that team. There's still a lot of the same guys there that drafted him and traded him. Obviously, Brian Flores is not there, which, that was a whole thing with some of the way, Tua said certain things about him. And then obviously Mika, they were questions about where he was placed. They mainly played him at corner. Obviously the Steelers moved him at safety and he did wonders there for a couple of years. But yeah, we'll see what ends up happening. I believe they just gave him an extension. We'll see. I thought he was more so going to be a guy they sign and trade and they get rid of him. But he might be able to find a long-time home in Miami, and I have nothing but good things to say about him. In my opinion, his work ethic, some of the things he said about the team, I think aligned with how I wanted the players to think about the team and how I wanted them to play, but also the culture and the overall culture of the city, the steel town, the steel workers, and working hard and doing your job. I feel like he advocated for that a lot, and I definitely appreciated that.
Oh, he sure did. He was a phenomenal. I think he's a phenomenal player, phenomenal person. So it's sad to see him go, but at least he didn't try to burn any bridges or say any bad stuff or whatever. But that too is just there's so much we could go in terms of the way that players move around. Like we've kind of talked about, it's a business, which is probably going to be the title for this is just welcome to the business or something like that. Just but
Mm-hmm.
overall, I mean, there's so much just to recap about. We're gonna play the Panthers, and we're that game doesn't go well. I mean, do we start kind of waving the white flag and getting nervous?
I think to me, if the Jets game goes bad, I will be Mr. Overreact over here. I do not think the
Mhm.
Steelers should lose that game. I think even though it's a road game,
What's that?
it's a winnable game. And if they don't
Oh
end
no.
up winning that game, I'm going to be very disappointed with certain things. And I would assume if they don't win that game, it's probably going to be because of
Um,
the offense, but just because if I look at both teams, I really don't see the Jets lighting up this
okay.
defense. I see the offense stumbling and not being able to create yards and not being able to score. So just kind of the repeat of the previous years, and that's just something I don't want to see.
Oh boy. Hmm. Uh,
Just trying to get this thing
Hello.
locked on.
Okay.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Oh, we're still going. The recording did not stop. Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't
All
know.
right.
Yeah, just some behind the scenes stuff for our viewers. We originally tried going onto my hotspot to record because I figured it'd be easier, and now here we are. But anyways, folks, we've talked about a lot tonight. We've talked about the draft. We've talked about the Buccaneers game. We've talked about the defense to O line, and we're gonna have to wait and see because we're gonna be here for after the Carolina game and for the rest of the season. So as we start to close out tonight, Gabe, do you have any final thoughts?
Not really. I would just say I wouldn't get your hopes too high up on this game either if we lose or win badly or win a lot by a lot. I would say week one is big. If this team loses, it's probably because, week one, it's probably because our offense is not what it needs to be in order for us to make a playoff run. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that Jets game is big, and hope for a win there, and then a win at week one starts it, and hopefully that can snowball into an above 500 season, a playoff run, and hopefully Super Bowl win.
Hopefully, a Super Bowl. That is the end goal. The standard is the standard. But that's going to be all the time we have for tonight. Stay tuned as we talk about the Panthers next week and then get into the meat and potatoes. We'll talk about the New York Jets, however that game goes. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us. This has been the Steel Download, episode 3.